Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Marty Belsky, and I have the honor to be the president of the Akron-Summit Council for Holocaust and Genocide Education. You'll hear a little bit at the end of the program today about our other major event in the spring. And I want to also, as a procedural announcement, if you have parked in the lot, you can go to the library downstairs, to the security office, and get a QR code that'll give you a discount. I'll make that announcement as well at the end. And I want to also welcome the people out there in television land to sort of do that. I'm supposed to exit this. Okay. I'm trying to exit this thing here, but I'm not having any success. I was told how to do it, but I guess I can't. And we are really excited about this program, and we're really excited about the idea here of educating you about what's really going on and what the future is like. We first want to welcome, if we can, our host, Pam Hickson-Stevenson, who is right now is the Executive Director of the Akron-Summit County Public Library. And she's been here since April of 2018. She's observed our program in the spring every year. Before that, she was the Deputy Director of the Akron system for 12 years. She also serves as an adjunct member of the Kent State University faculty. She's past president of Ohio Library Council, and here in Summit County, she's a board member of the Child Guidance and Family Solutions, Downtown Akron Partnership, Summit Education Initiative, and past president of the International Institute. She's a graduate of leadership at Akron and other community leadership positions. And again, on behalf of the council, we want to thank Pam for allowing us to use the library for this event. Pam, it's up to you. Here you are.
Thank you, Marty. It is a privilege and an honor to welcome you to the Akron-Summit County Public Library for this year's seminar presented by the Akron-Summit Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education. In a country and a world where tolerance and understanding seem to be shrinking, and where divisions and hatred seem to be growing, this annual seminar is a shining light and an example to all. The conversations are challenging and change is difficult, but the work of the council demonstrates how critical both conversations and change are in bringing us to the goals of acceptance, understanding, and respect. Thank you for being here this evening and for visiting the library, which has been serving the community for 150 years now. We are happy to support the efforts to bring greater understanding to Akron and Summit County by hosting this annual event. Thank you.
How do you turn it off? How do we turn off this? I just did. That's not much better, is it? Okay. Sorry for a little technical glitch there. I apologize. Thank you, Pam, for that, and also for being a constant supporter, a stalwart supporter of the work we're doing here. I want to begin by thanking each of you for being here, both here and in person and in television land, because your presence is a testament to the importance of this conversation and our discussion. I just finished a book called Hitler's People. It describes how a number of individuals in pre-Nazi Germany had anti-Semitic points of view, but were reluctant to exercise those points of view in a visible way. It took a number of leaders and people in charge to make it okay for them to express their anti-Semitic statements, and then to put those anti-Semitic statements into effect with anti-Semitic activities, which of course wound up being in the Holocaust. We must remember that history, not just as a record of the past, but as a powerful teacher. The Holocaust, the darkest chapter of anti-Semitism, left scars that still shape the world today. Alarmingly, however, we continue to witness the resurgence of anti-Semitism alongside other forms of hate, genocide, and intolerance. This seminar is not just a reflection of what has been, but a call to action for what's going to happen in the future unless we take some affirmative action. To that end, tonight's seminar has been possible in large part due to a grant from the Ohio Holocaust and Genocide Memorial and Education Commission, and the commitment to this as well. We thank them for that grant and for the work we're doing with that grant. Understanding the roots of anti-Semitism, both in history and in current times, is essential if we are to avoid and prevent the atrocities of the past from repeating. But more than just understanding, we have to learn to be upstanders. That is, not merely sit back, but also be outspoken. People who actively stand against hate in all forms will help us with that battle, whether it be in our schools, workplaces, communities, or online. We have to be allies for the Jewish and non-Jewish community and all those facing marginalization, discrimination, and violence. We all heard the phrase used again and again about the other. The other are always the people that they're not. And we have to make sure that they recognize that we are people too, that all of us are people too, and all of us deserve both recognition, acceptance, not just tolerance, but understanding. This evening will help us equip us with the knowledge and tools to confront anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry, fostering a culture of compassion, empathy, and true justice. Together we can challenge hate and ensure that the echoes of the Holocaust are not merely heard, but headed and heeded and followed as we work toward a future where such history does not repeat itself. History cannot be allowed to repeat itself. We cannot go through a situation where we have anti-Semitism, disgust, and hate morph into something much, much worse. If you have questions for our panelists or speaker, please raise your hand after the speakers are all done. We have 3x5 cards, and we'll ask you to write your question down. I'll collect them and give them to our moderator, who will be introduced in a few minutes. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Barb White. Barb is a retired Youth and Adult Services librarian and deputy director with the Akron-Summit County Public Library, where she has spent more than 3 decades engaging with students and educators on the important and complex themes of the Holocaust. She's a graduate of both NYU and Kent State University. She's been deeply involved in Holocaust and Genocide Education. She has served in various capacities with the Akron-Summit Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education, and was formerly a member of the Network for Holocaust and Genocide Education. Though retired, Barb's commitment to the study of Holocaust remains unwavering. She continues to expand and provide understanding of the crucial history, while also dedicating herself to work in early childhood and dementia education at local, state, and national levels. Her lifetime of scholarship and service makes her uniquely qualified and equipped to lead tonight's discussion before we move into our panel. We are honored to have her here and share her insights and reflection, and thank you again for being here, and let's give Barb a round of applause, please.
Okay, the terrifying moment of will the tech work? I think we're okay. So thank you, Marty, for that gracious introduction. Really what I wanted to say is that I'm here learning along with all of you. That's what tonight is about, learning together. I think the title of our evening together, The Echoes of the Holocaust, really speaks to the way that the Holocaust reflects the past, but really propels us, projects us into our future. Anti-Semitism seems to be indestructibly constructed of the myths and the stereotypes and the disinformation and the imagined conspiracies about Jews because they are Jews. It is really, in some ways, quite that simple. And it manifests itself generation after generation in dehumanization and exploitation and discrimination and violence against Jewish people because they are Jews. It is really, in some ways, that simple. Holocaust author, survivor, witness, Elie Wiesel, with whom many of you are familiar, put that singular event of the Holocaust in its historical and modern and anti-Semitic context in 2005 when he spoke at the opening of the new museum at Yad Vashem. And this is what he said. He said, the statement is, it was man's inhumanity to man, and that's something we hear very often, right? This was the epitome of what man's inhumanity to man could be. And Wiesel said, no, it was man's inhumanity to Jews, because Jews were not killed because they were human beings. In the eyes of the killers, they were not human beings. They were Jews. And it is because they were Jews that it was so easy for the killers to kill. So in this, Wiesel is really pointing to that dehumanization that we spoke of just a moment ago. And Marty's right. It can take a charismatic leader or two or three who say, this is okay. It's okay to do this, to legitimize that hate and legitimize the way that hate becomes action. But we should never forget that it is the act of individuals making decisions, making the decision to either reject or to embrace the hateful words and ultimately the hateful actions. Individuals putting all of this into action. And so we need to keep that in mind. Now, Primo Levi, the scientist, Holocaust survivor who spent his early 20s in Auschwitz, had this to say, and you may be able to see it, and you might not, because there's a curtain in the way from my vantage point. But this is what he had to say. He said, we cannot understand the Holocaust. You know, I work with young people, and to ask them to understand something so big is difficult. It's difficult for any of us to really kind of wrap our heads around. But he said, we must understand from where it springs, and we must be on our guard. And if understanding is impossible, knowing is imperative, because what happened could happen again. So that's why we're here together. We're here to know a bit more at the end of the evening, to learn together, and to try to understand from where it springs. The extremism of the Third Reich's ideology and its practice took root in a persistent history of hatred of Jews because they were Jews, dating back at least to the Holy Roman Empire. And I think it's a good way to think about this is think of a sword and think of the edges of the sword. And the first sharp edge is that based on religious foundation. Well, you can kind of address that, right? You can convert. And so you can address that first edge if you are so inclined. But think of the second edge, the other sharp edge. And that's one that we start to see really gain steam in the late 19th century, and that's a racial ideology. Jews are not human because of their very genetic makeup. You cannot avoid that. You are who you are. And so we have this double-edged, and the interesting thing is that that ideology that begins to really pick up steam in the 19th century is still using the tropes, the stereotypes from that first edge of the sword, from when anti-Semitism was based largely on religious foundation. So keep that in mind. We are going to be, I hope there are seatbelts in those chairs, because we are going to be going through the centuries very quickly tonight because of the time that we have. So, and we're going to use images largely because images can really be a thread that we follow through the centuries. And think about along that thread is a continuous, just repeated often and often again, discriminatory laws, expulsions, and acts of violence, some of which left hundreds dead, others of which left thousands dead, all along that thread that we're going to follow. So we're going to start, and again, this is going to be fast, so get ready. We're going to start first in the 13th century with a bestiary. Bestiaries were created using illustrations to teach Christian morals and values. The hyena, with red fur and claws, was a character that folks would be familiar with in looking at bestiaries, a stand-in for Satan. He is devouring corpses to signify the devouring of souls. And this particular hyena is a manticore. If you think of the Sphinx, right? This is combining different beings. And the head of this manticore is that of a Jew. And we know this because he's wearing the identifying hat at the time that Jews wore. And he has this sort of the stereotypical sort of elongated nose that we begin to see over and over again. Now, if you look just on the other side of the slide, this is a medieval etching, but it reappears in 1939 on the front page of Der Stürmer, the Nazi weekly newspaper. And this depicts the blood libel accusation. The idea that Jews are compelled by their religion to murder Christian children in order to make matzah at Passover time. This is something that they are compelled to do by their religious teachings. The blood libel reaches back at least to the 12th century, and likely before. All right, here we go. Now we're in the 20th century. And here we are on the left-hand side. That's the cover of a 1911 edition of the 1903 publication in Russia, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And this is a publication that details the Jewish plan for world domination. On that cover, it's important to know we've got symbols of the occult. We've got trope phrases like, thus the Jews shall win. And the protocols were written in such a way that they're very vague. They don't talk about dates, times, specifics, right? Very smart. They kind of fit everybody. The Jews are going to accomplish world domination through capitalism. The Jews are going to accomplish world domination through communism, right? It sort of fit everybody's need for the plan that folks knew the Jews had in place. Just next to it, 1920 to 1922, Henry Ford, our esteemed industrialist, Henry Ford, reprints, serializes the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in his newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. He's familiar with it because he believes in what it has to say. His newspaper is failing, and he knows that this is a way to get people to buy newspapers. They're all going to want to read this. So he reprints it. Let's move a little further along, and there's the 1937 poster advertising an exhibit at the museum in Munich, and what it reads is, the eternal Jew, right? So what we see, the eternal Jew, money in hand, whip in the other hand, symbolizing power, and communism in his pocket. It's everything the Protocols of the Elders of Zion said was part of the plan. I think most of us are familiar, have seen something like the photo on the left-hand side. That is a rally in the Berlin Sports Palace in June of 1943. We've seen pictures like this before. Every seat is taken. The sign reads, Führer command and we follow. We've seen these in books. Students have seen these in books. We've seen them in newsreels. So we're not surprised to see another rally. We're familiar with these photos. This rally, attended by 20,000 people, a pro-Nazi rally. Madison Square Garden in New York City, 1939. Billed as a pro-America rally. The signage there says, "Stop Jewish domination of Christian Americans." So when we think that it's there, and then it was here, and then. This was the time of Father Coughlin. This was the time of the quasi-military Christian Front. And this was the time of accusations that President Roosevelt had enacted the Jew deal, which was a communist plan. This was the time when Charles Lindbergh, an American hero, wrote in 1939 of, quote, the pressing sea of yellow, black, and brown that threatened the white race. He thought a war with Germany and other Western countries was, quote, racial suicide and would lead to the dilution of European blood by foreign races, right? The Jew is working to replace us. And lest we think that children were immune to this, on the left-hand side, this is the game of the Jew, which first appears in the 15th century. Notice the Jew is in the center square. You move your tokens around, you hope you roll a 7 and can put them in the middle because no one can take those away from you. The Jew likes money, the Jew hoards money, so you're lucky if you land on the Jew. This game board from 1800 in Great Britain. To the right, a children's book in Germany, 1938. It is called The Poisonous Mushroom. And it states, just as it is often hard to tell a toadstool, from an edible mushroom, so too is it often hard to recognize the Jew as a swindler and criminal. And the book says, the God of the Jews is money. So now think about the bestiary picture that pulls together two types of beings. Think about this amalgam in the cover of this children's book. Think about the trope that the Jews collect money, that they bring money, that they are controlling. They control this space on the board. They control governments. They control finances. So keep that in mind. So across the centuries. So, you can imagine how excited those children are who are on the left side of the screen, right? Adolf Hitler has just become chancellor, and now he's visiting their Hitler Youth gathering, right? This is an exciting moment for them. I think we can all understand why children would be excited about that. So lots of smiles. Everybody's happy. This is not the place to go through the history of the Hitler Youth movement, but even before it became compulsory, it grew exponentially in the years that were to follow. So we're not surprised to see a very large gathering of children in the other photo. What we might be surprised is to find out that this was Camp Siegfried in Yaphank, New York, on Long Island in the 1930s. Children were sent there to swim and to hike, to practice archery, to go to dances, and to be steeped in Nazi ideology. Not only did it serve youth, but Camp Siegfried held all kinds of celebrations on the weekends. The Long Island Railroad had the Siegfried Special on weekend mornings to bring people out to Camp Siegfried. New York Times reported in 1938 that for German Day festivities, 40,000 people attended this camp. And when they got there, they received a warm welcome. That's what it says right above the camp. They were greeted with Nazi and Hitler Youth flags. They were greeted by men in Italian black shirts, SA-style brown shirts, and Nazi military uniforms. They were told the purpose of the camp was to raise the future leaders of America and make sure they were steeped in Nazi ideals. There was no question what this camp was about. These are individuals making the decision that this is the place they want to be, that this supports what they are thinking. And they are not unsettled by what this camp has to present. Just after the Nuremberg laws were enacted, it wouldn't be a surprise to come upon a town and see a sign that says, Jews not welcome here. It wouldn't be surprising to find street signs that celebrated Adolf Hitler and Goering and Goebbels. We might be surprised to know that the town that surrounded Camp Siegfried, those were the street signs. That's a photo from that community. Those street signs, of course, disappeared after the start of the war. The camp was closed after the start of the war. What you might be surprised to learn is that not only were there street signs like this, but there was a covenant on the books that only folks who of German ancestry could purchase housing in this area. That covenant was on the books until 2017. People making real choices, people making real decisions that have real consequences for real, maybe people, right? We can't identify the moment in a person's brain when suddenly the Jew is less than human, the Jew is easy to target, the Jew becomes easy to kill. We can't identify that, but we know that it's built on moment after moment, century after century, deed after deed. It doesn't just spring up. Columnist Bret Stephens just wrote in the New York Times, he described it as the long struggle against those who mean harm and also against those who excuse their actions and those whose apathy speeds their way. And if we talk about then and there, and we talk about here and then, we have to talk about here and now. So a recent study by the ADL, they asked, they shared with over 4,000 people a list of sort of typical anti-Semitic tropes and said, which of these do you believe in? And they recorded how many believed 6 or more. In 2022, it was 20%. In 2024, this would be January of 2024, it was 24%. What were some of those tropes? And I won't read all of them to you, but what were some of them? Jews have too much power in the international financial markets. Jews have too much control over global affairs. Jews have too much control over the United States government. Jews have too much control over the global media. People hate Jews because of the way Jews behave. They hate Jews because they are Jews. 24%. Think of that eternal Jew. Does it fit those tropes? It sure does. He's got the coin in one hand, the whip of power in the other, and governments in his pocket. We can reach back to our very recent past and see the building blocks to this contemporary moment. So 2017 Charlottesville, this young man has made his vocation to protect everyone. He stands in front of the marches of Charlottesville. They have a sign that reads, "Jews are Satan's children," right? They march saying, "Jews will not replace us," right? The great replacement theory. It's what Charles Lindbergh was talking about. If you let them do it, they'll replace us. Jews are Satan's children, the bestiary, the hyena with the red fur, and the Jewish face with the Jewish hat. We know that on October 2018, a gunman enters the Tree of Life synagogue and murders 11 because they are Jewish. In the same way that in 2015, a gunman entered Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina, and killed folks there just because they were African American. At an anti-vax rally in Columbus, Ohio, if you were there, you would have heard that Jews controlled the Chinese labs and had created COVID, and you would have seen someone with this sign, "The real plague." A rat, a Jew, the real plague. We've seen that before. It's like that mushroom, that poisonous mushroom, that you've got to look hard because it's easy to miss. Robert Keith Packer, at the DC insurrection in January, wore this sweatshirt, Camp Auschwitz. I'd like to tell you that you can't get it, but it's pretty easy to get still. In that same year, the FBI shared that Jews were the victims of more than 50% of all religiously motivated hate crimes, even though they were only 1/50th of the overall population. And then, of course, in May 14, 2022, the mass shooting in a Buffalo, New York grocery store, the 10 people killed and those wounded, all African American. The murderer, we later found out, was a proponent of the Great Replacement theory, right? The Jews support civil rights because they are seeking to replace the white people of this country and of the world. And the ongoing sustained support of anti-Semitism is global, and we know that. So if you were to get online, you would see University of Auschwitz T-shirts being worn at German rallies. established 1941 with the outline of the towers that we have become familiar with. You would see in Italy sweatshirts, Auschwitzland, in Disneyfied script, right? And on you would hear chants of "Gas the Jews," and on our own streets, "Go back to Poland." The irony in that statement is that if we went back to Poland, of course, we'd see a greatly reduced Jewish population. There were 3.5 million Jews before the war. There are maybe 20,000 now in Poland. We would find more little statuettes of the lucky Jew in Poland than actual Jews. The lucky Jew is sold widely, and it is intended for what you might imagine, right? They say a Jew in the home is worth coin in the pocket. And what do we see? We see the misshapenness of the Jew as a sign of that degeneration. We see Jewish influence over money and the market. We see supernatural powers. It's not a big step from this that you are so happy to have in your home because it might bring you some luck, to turning all of those things into suspicion and resentment and hatred. When Elie Wiesel concluded his remarks at that Yad Vashem opening, he said this. He said, "My good friends, we never try to tell the tale to make people weep. It's too easy. We didn't want pity. If we decided to tell the tale, it's because we wanted the world to be a better world, just a better world, and learn and remember. There is a frightening character in all of Kafka's stories. It's always the messenger who tried to deliver the message and is unable to do so. We feel sorry for a poor messenger, but there is something more tragic than that. When the messenger has delivered the message and nothing has changed." Wiesel said, "You heard tonight about antisemitism and intolerance. The messenger has delivered the message. What is our role? We must become the messenger's messenger." Rabbi Tarfon said, "It's not yours to finish the task, but neither are you free to set it aside. So I would say that we need to engage young people, we need to engage our neighbors and our friends and our colleagues, and even the people with whom we have great difference in other areas, and we need to widen our lens and deepen our considerations and ask the very good questions, the ones that don't have simple answers. But we need to ask, probably most importantly, as Holocaust scholar said, Yehuda Bauer said, we need to determine the what now and the what next. And that's what we're here to do tonight, to begin to determine the what now and the what next. I am blessed to be with all of you tonight, and you have my deepest gratitude for your being here. So thanks so much. Appreciate it.
I'm going to ask the panel members to come up and take a seat while we make some further introductions. And I want to thank Barb for her remarks, putting the framework for what we're going to discuss the rest of the evening. It is my true honor to introduce a Cleveland and Northeast Ohio broadcast legend. Leon Bibb, with over 5 decades of experience in journalism, has been a trusted and beloved newscaster for all of us. He's in semi-retirement. I know it's not complete because he has his own show on Saturday mornings. He continues to inform and inspire as a senior correspondent, commentator, and host. And he does it here in Cleveland, where he began his career. He's a graduate of Bowling Green State University, and he worked for a long period of time as a reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He has earned 10 Emmy Awards and numerous other accolades for his civic and professional obligations and involvement. In addition to his work as a journalist, he is a talented narrator, actor, and writer. He has performed with the Cleveland Orchestra, Cleveland Philharmonic, our own Akron Symphony, and has starred in stage productions and feature films. A Vietnam veteran, Leon was awarded the Bronze Star for his meritorious service in combat. We are thrilled, and I mean that, to have him with us today, sharing his wisdom and experience. So please join me in welcoming Leon Bibb.
Thank you so much, Martin Belsky. We appreciate that, and thank you, Barb White, as well, for your presentation today. Deeply, deeply appreciated. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. I will tell you, you need only turn on your television set or tune into the radio or read the newspaper, and you certainly will find aspects of the problem. It is hate speech, which brings us together today, and hate actions as well. We wrestle with them as we try to end these practices that grew out of words that hurt, that are harmful, and that are hateful, and practices as well. However, sometimes you don't need the electronic media or newspaper accounts to take you to the problem. Sometimes you need only to listen down the street, or in the corridor, or in some other place. Today, we try to do what we can to solve the problem and make a better world where hate will play no part. Specifically, we look at the past, the Holocaust, as Barb showed us. And at genocide, we look at it as well. Today, we speak of an education and an answer toward a quest to solve a big problem. My name is Leon Bibb, and so we begin. Let's begin with our panel. Introducing our panel, we've got Rabbi Joshua Brown, Senior Rabbi at Temple Israel Akron. He believes Judaism is intended to punctuate daily life by helping celebrate the greatest joys and survive the greatest fears. That belief is part of his spiritual leadership. He also serves on the board of the Cleveland American Jewish Committee, as well as on the board of Miami University Hillel. Elaine Phippen is with us as well, who's taught English, speech, theater, and film at Our Lady of the Elms High School for 36 years. Is Elaine here? Hi, Elaine. You'll come later. Let me do your biography. She coaches speech and debate, is a member of the Ohio High School Speech and Debate Hall of Fame. She's a member of the Holocaust and Genocide Education Network of Ohio. Kelly Fishman is here, Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League's Cleveland office, which covers Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Western Pennsylvania. David Moritz is an activist and son of a Holocaust survivor. David Moritz has been outspoken at Asheville, North Carolina's City Council, where he has made many speeches against anti-Semitism. Dr. Tim Mernon is an associate professor of education at Bowling Green State University. His particular focus is literacy, language arts, and curriculum design. At BGSU, he prepares teachers in secondary and middle education, childhood education. 10 years ago, he was the co-principal investigator on a Fulbright Hays group study abroad project to take 10 teachers to Poland, Hungary, and Greece. What he did there was to follow the footsteps of 6 Toledo area Holocaust survivors. He speaks on strategies for teaching about the Holocaust and genocide. Dr. Mernon is president of the Ohio Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education. And we've got another one here, and I don't have your biography, so you'll give us, Rachel, you'll give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of who you are.
Is this on? Okay. Hi, Rachel Felber. I'm the executive director of Hillel at Kent State University, also serving the University of Akron. So I am here representing my work with the college population.
Pardon me, Rachel, for omitting you, but you get
All
a chance
good.
to introduce yourself. I'm glad to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our panel. They will be with us for the next period of time. We came up with a few questions that we would like all of you to kind of take a stab at if you can, and before we open it up to questions from the audience. Question: what are your perceptions of anti-Semitism today, and have you observed or personally experienced anti-Semitism in your community online or on any other forum? Who would like to take a shot at that? a few seconds. Rabbi, why don't we begin with you?
It's my turn.
I'm going to answer the question. I really wanted somebody else to go first because I was ready for the second answer, which is, I mean, the first answer is yes. And I think people on this panel will have a better sense of the data that's out there. We know that anti-Semitism is rising. We know that our kids are facing it more directly and more intensely, and other people will be able to tell you much better than I can. What I would say is that context matters. And the context of the world today means that a comment that was said 10 years ago that would still be considered anti-Semitic, but would be anti-Semitic in a world that wasn't as scary in America, is now not only an anti-Semitic comment, it's an anti-Semitic and threatening comment. And so there's a difference between, like, my children who are in school having someone say 10 years ago, oh, hey, that kid over there is Jewish, or that's the Jew boy, or something that might be even a little worse. And then hearing that today in 2024 and starting to wonder, is this a person I should be physically afraid of? And so I think context matters, and the context has changed drastically, certainly in the last 10 years, but it's gotten increasingly worse in the last 5.
Who'd like to take a stab at that?
So I feel like I need this closer to me. Is that better? I can follow up from what you said, Rabbi, especially because that is what I'm working with on the university campus every day. We have students, they clearly articulate to us on a daily basis that they have to hide a piece of themselves unless they're within the walls of our Hillel building. They have to take off their Hillel shirts. They feel like they need to hide their Star of David or any other Jewish symbols that they are wearing, for fear that just by being in a classroom, walking through campus, being involved in any other student organization, if someone knows that they're Jewish, they don't know what might come their way. And we all know right now that our young people, our students that are trying to figure out who they are and who they want to be, they live their lives as much as they live it in the physical campus community. They live it on their cell phones and on their devices, and it doesn't matter if it's happening in their classroom or in their student organization. It is happening in someone's classroom and in someone's student organization, and it is as if it is happening to them. And the work that I do every day at Hillel is to help our students feel empowered, that they can go out into their campus community, be protected, and also feel confident that they can go out and wear their Jewish symbols, wear something that says Hillel at Kent State University or the University of Akron, and not feel like they're going to be treated any differently just by wearing that.
You actually have youngsters who hide their Stars of David?
We do, all the time. And when we did our October 7th memorial program last week, every student that spoke about feeling like they don't know how safe they are unless they're within Hillel. And when they go out across campus, they have to think twice about how they're interacting with people, what they're saying, and what they're wearing.
Yeah. Dr. Tim, you're at Bowling Green State University. Do you see this kind of thing at the university? Do you see instances of anti-Semitism at Bowling Green or other places where you've gone?
You know, I was asked this question about a year ago, post October 7th, you know, were there big protests erupting on campus? Was there an anti-Jewish sentiment? And I kind of jokingly said, you know, I'm not sure Bowling Green is that woke. We're not having these big protests. We don't see this real outward sort of hatred directed at Jews. But I do think that the biggest thing that I see is the ignorance. Most students who are non-Jewish don't know any Jews, and so what they take into the world are the tropes and the stereotypes and the myths, because they don't have another opportunity to debunk those kinds of things. So it's a big piece of what I see is just the ignorance that then translates into sort of smaller examples of that. But yes, I think Christian students feel very comfortable to wear some of those markers of cultural or religious identity, and I don't think that the Jewish students that I know feel that same kind of ease and comfort walking out across campus.
Elaine, what about you?
Kelly.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Kelly, what about you?
So one of the things that's interesting in what we study at the ADL is how we see all of these things manifesting in other forms of hate. And so we track white supremacist groups and white extremist groups, and they are equal opportunity haters. And what they do is they use anti-Semitic ideology, anti-Semitic tropes to target other identity groups. And so the thing I often find myself telling people is that you don't have to be Jewish to be impacted by anti-Semitism. Many of the flyers that we see white supremacist groups placing in neighborhoods or things they're posting online tie anti-Semitism to, like what Barb said, with the Great Replacement theory. So now they're pulling in racism and xenophobia. We see misogyny and anti-Semitism tied together, or anti-Semitism and anti-LGBTQ plus propaganda very easily tied together. And so what we see is these groups are using these very old tropes as a way to capitalize on fear, because that's essentially what they're doing, right? They're using fear of somehow someone else is going to have something more than me, right? They make it a zero-sum game. If a Jewish person has a right to attend Hillel or go to synagogue, you somehow lose out on your own religious identity. And that's not true, right? Both things can exist at the same time. Multiple identities can exist at the same time.
David Moritz, you're the son of a Holocaust survivor.
Yes. And I grew up with his stories, and I would say that the anti-Semitism is alive and well in the United States today. And I think that the anti-Semitism that concerns me the most is that it's taken a form of genocidal intent. I once sat at a bar next to your typical right-wing anti-Semite, like the Charlottesville, and he asked me, "Do you face any discrimination?" And that's not the anti-Semitism I'm really worried about. I'm worried about the anti-Semitism that's genocidal, which anti-Zionism is a form of that. And I've been personally subject to 5 physical assaults as a Jew. And one of the surprising things is most of you have probably never heard of any of them. And that's because there's complicity in the media and in these educational establishments. The first attack, I was attacked physically at UCLA on the first day of the protest on April 25th, simply for standing outside of their encampment and observing. The media was there, the police was there, the administration was there. No one did anything. And the next day, the LA Times headline was, "Peaceful Protest." In fact, the attacks the encampment did went on for 5 days, and none of it was ever reported. The second and most serious attack I was a part of, or a victim of, was in Asheville. This one was more reported. I went to a library event similar to this, almost exactly like this. And the speaker, the session was lessons from the strategic lessons from the Palestinian resistance, which I attended because I was curious to see what kind of things they were going to teach there. It turned out to be glorifying terrorism, which is what I thought. During the event, me and 2 people who were standing there were pointed out as Zionists. Mind you, this was in a public library where it was said attendance was for everybody. We were then physically assaulted. This has been reported. This event actually was reported, and I give credit to the press in Asheville about it. But it reminds me that in Germany, Hitler purposely would invite, say, Marxists or communists to his rallies so that they would be assaulted, and that reminded me of that. So I would say, yes, it's very alive and well, and it's spreading, and it's dangerous because it's seen as justified to physically assault people and that's what's troublesome.
I want our panelists to feel free to jump in. It helps me if you jump in and you've got something to say. Don't wait for me to come to you if you've got something. But what you're saying is what Barb was saying a little bit ago. What we saw in the 1800s and in the 1700s, and what we saw in the 1930s and the 1940s, some of that still exists today. How do you deal with that? Kelly, how do you deal with that? Rachel, how do you deal with that? Rabbi, how do we deal with that?
I think it's important to remember that there are allies that exist, and I think one of the things that I've noticed just in my work at the ADL is that many people in the Jewish community feel like they've lost allies. I am not Jewish. I am confident every single one of you assumed that I was, because my last name is Fishman and I work for the ADL. My work to me is very important as someone who is adjacent to the Jewish community. And so it's really important that we have people that are willing to stand up in city councils or school boards, in the state legislatures to say anti-Semitism is alive and well. What are we going to do to stop it? What are the resources we can implement in our schools? What are the ordinances, like anti-masking, right? That protects everyone. We don't want white supremacists marching down our streets, masks with flags that have swastikas on them. That is scary for all of us. And so how do we use that allyship and the people in the community to help fight back against the blatant anti-Semitism that we see?
Rachel, you were nodding in agreement with what you said.
I was nodding. We model a lot of that at the campus level. We have student fellowships that are involved specifically in building partnerships across other minority groups and interfaith groups. The challenge that I think that Jewish people have is that we bear the burden of educating the entire community. We bear the burden of going to the other organizations, the other groups, whether it's a faith-based group or a different culture group or a common interest group, and saying, we'd like to build a relationship with you, and in doing so, we hope that you'll help be allies for the Jewish community. My experience at Kent State in the last 12 months is that none of those groups were coming to us on their own. And so we're putting our young adults in positions to educate them on how to build these relationships so that we can have allies for the next generation.
Rabbi, how do we do that? How do we educate? Where do we begin? What's the starting point? People out here want to know, what can I do, Rabbi? Where can I begin?
I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to go back a step. So to answer that question, I would say, where do we start? It always starts with relationships and where we can sit down with people, and that has become increasingly more difficult as we become more divided. And the knee-jerk reaction to violence in the community, to being attacked, to it's not to do what you did and to step into it and to be public about it. It's to retreat and to find ways to put up walls. And so I want to, now I'm going to go back, which is to say that one of the ways that we are attacking anti-Semitism is it's not one that we would necessarily stand up and be proud about. It's that we've created walls around ourselves that are incredibly high. I noticed there were security guards, there was police outside of this auditorium as I walked in. I would imagine that if we were talking about the book of the month, that there wouldn't be policemen outside of this auditorium. There are police out in every one of our synagogues, at every one of our services. We don't have open doors. We no longer unlock our doors. There are all sorts of protections that we're taking to insulate ourselves and to protect ourselves. And we just had our High Holy Days, and I was going through the list of people who attended and didn't attend. For all the Jews out there, we do take attendance, just in case you were wondering. And I know that there's from knowing people well enough, I know that there's a significant number of people who would show up to a small, casual, unpublicized event at the synagogue, but who stayed home because they were worried that there were too many people coming and that somebody else might attack us on a day when we gather in large numbers. So we live with that burden and we protect ourselves, but that also separates us from the people we need to be building relationships with in order to have these conversations and educate people.
Tim Mernon, you're professor of education at Bowling Green. Do we put this in the curriculum, or is this in the curriculum, teaching about hate and what it does to us?
Yeah, you've asked a really good and complex question. So in the state, standards, there's one place in world history in high school.
A little closer to the mic,
Yeah.
please.
So there's one place in the state standards to explore the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide, and it's one bullet. It doesn't say, that you'll do a whole course on it or a whole unit of study. It could be 1 week, looking at the 10 stages of genocide and doing comparative kinds of studies. So the short answer is, where do we teach about this? And how do we use something like Holocaust studies to help us with this? Or how do we bridge some of these gaps? This is a really profound challenge that even we're having in Holocaust studies. Is the goal of Holocaust studies to study the historical, events that led up to the Holocaust and to understand that historical time period? Or is the goal of this to understand that historical time period, to understand what led up to that, and to draw those connections to what's happening in our own communities today, and to use that opportunity of a lesson to do something different? And that's a really complex thing. I don't know that everybody across the state of Ohio agrees with how to do that. I know the folks that I see being most effective working on some of this are those people that connect the lessons of history to the lessons of today, and to use that to help students explore what they understand about all of that. So, you saw some of the photographs that are up here. The folks here in Akron-Summit County are, I think, making an attempt to do that. But it's a model that we could expand across the state. It's not something that's happening everywhere.
Yeah. Jump in there, Rabbi. Jump in there. I know you're ready for it.
I just want to say briefly that the Holocaust is not a Jewish topic. And so I think it's important that when we're teaching the Holocaust, that we're not teaching it because we want to teach Judaism in the public schools, or we want people to understand a specific moment in history for specific people. For me, at least, this is how we teach it within our synagogue. We don't teach the Holocaust as something that just happened to the Jewish people. We teach it because it applies to what is happening today for lots of people. And we want to be experts in fighting hate and in understanding how powerful words can be. And the Holocaust is just our means to get those lessons across for today. It's not about, I wouldn't put it, I don't know where it's put in the curriculum, but I would rather it be in a civics curriculum than in a history curriculum.
Yeah, yeah. David, I'm intrigued by your story, being the son of a Holocaust survivor. When you were coming along, growing up, did your parent talk about the Holocaust, and did that embolden you to go out and fight this fight that we're fighting right here?
Yes and yes are the short answers. I would say my father survived with his younger brother together, mostly in hiding for 7 years in Germany and Luxembourg and France. And my grandfather was in Dachau concentration camp, and my great-grandmother died in concentration camp, among many, many family members. And my father was very vocal about his experience and talked about it at dinner every evening, and he wrote a book about his experience. He was a talented painter, and he illustrated his book. It's online for free. It's Survival in World War II.com. And his younger brother, on the other hand, never spoke about it to his children at all. So people experienced it and expressed it differently. So I grew up with all the stories, and it's impacted me a lot in terms of how I've approached the anti-Semitism I see today. One story in particular, if you bear with me, when my father was a child growing up in Germany, I think he was about 7 years old, and he was the only Jewish family in a small town, and they put speakers in front of his house blaring Hitler speeches, and students marched back and forth in front of a house, chanting, among other things, "When Jew blood spurts from our knives." And he was in shock because one of the students marching in front of his house was his best friend from school. And his father said, don't pay any attention to them. They're just stupid. They don't mean it. Well, clearly history has shown that they did mean it. The interesting thing is my father went back to Germany often. In fact, again, he went back to his town and he met his old best friend, and his best friend said just that. Oh, you know, we didn't really mean it that way. Well, I hear that, I hear the same thing today. That, oh, it's just, we don't mean it, it's just words. Those words mean something, and that's what's troubling today. And, you know, I feel like education is important. And I started off by going to city council. I've spoken a dozen times. I've tried to teach history. But it's very hard to debunk propaganda, which the slides show that is still recurring. It's very hard to fight that propaganda. I think we should make that effort, and we should start with our own children. We should start with the close family members first. If we can't even do that, it's harder to then try to do it with strangers. But at the same time, I think we have to fight with the resources we have. And that's also an important component of how we move forward.
Because many of the voices out there are very loud indeed. If you remember what Barb was just showing us a half hour ago or so, there was a newspaper or a magazine, and it made a reference to Dearborn, Michigan, and the name was speaking against Jews, and the name Ford was on there. Well, that name was Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company, who led the charge against a lot of what we're talking about, who led the charge toward a lot of what we are fighting right now, Henry Ford. And the name Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh, well-known American aviation hero, and he was involved in it. So sometimes the names are large out there that are spewing this hate, putting this hate out here. Martin has asked me to remind you that he's taking, if you have a question, hold your hand up. Martin will give you an index card, and you can write your question on that card, and he can get it up to us. If you've got a question out there of something we need to be addressing, and if you're nearby, I'll get a microphone underneath your chin. After all, I do work in television, and that's what I do, is put microphones underneath people's chins. One of the things that this council, the Summit Akron Council, does is makes reference to the echoes of Holocaust and genocide that are reverberating through conflicts that continue to plague our world. Are we seeing that now with what is going on in the Middle East? Are we seeing that as we turn on NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, and maybe the other one too?
Well, we know where you stand on the news.
Okay.
I think so. I think it's very difficult because we are seeing, one, an American civil rights Western lens placed on the conflict in the Middle East. And those two things aren't the same. And what has been going on in the Middle East has been happening for thousands of years. There's so much pain and trauma that it's very difficult. We've made it a very black and white issue. There's no gray area, there's no nuance. But what's happened is that there is pain and trauma for the people that exist in the Middle East, and that, I think, Rabbi, you talked about building relationships. Are we in a place where we can sit down with people who have opposite views than we do and have a conversation? Because my guess is that there's probably a lot of shared pain and trauma that exists, and we're seeing it magnified where, unfortunately, many of our young people get a lot of their news from TikTok. And if it's a splashy headline, it's really easy to buy into. I don't even know if it's called a headline on TikTok. Clearly, I don't TikTok. But there's no nuanced conversation there. So we see these encampments. We see violence erupt. You know, I was a teacher for a long time. We've got a lot of young people who don't have fully formed prefrontal cortexes and have very short impulse control. And so they're making snap decisions without really getting to know the people that are experiencing these things. And I think the more people like Rachel can work with student organizations to build those conversations is so important, because at the end of the day, everybody is human, and many of the people involved in, I will say, the kind of the conflict in the United States have never been to the Middle East and have no idea what that experience really is for all the people involved.
Rachel, Kelly, and Tim, you're all involved in education, school level. Let me tell you a quick story. 1,000 years ago, when I was in high school, at Glenville High School, which was predominantly black in the city of Cleveland, I think we had 5 white students in the whole student body. It was when the black middle class lived in the Glenville neighborhood, where I grew up. We had a play, and the play was called The Diary of Anne Frank. We were all black kids. I played Mr. Von Damme. I played a part in that play. We played Jews hiding out where Anne Frank hid out from the Nazis during World War II. Do we have to do more of the, and this was an all-black cast, because it was all black kids, but it was theater. Do we have to do that? Do we have to do more of that, what we were doing in the 1960s?
Well, I mean, that's important. I will never understand what it means to be black in America, but I bet some of that felt really similar to the black experience even today. And so I think it's why things like Hamilton, right, to see yourself represented in spaces is important. And I think to tell the stories authentically of the people who've experienced it is so important.
Anybody want a piece of this?
I would just jump in and offer a couple of different perspectives. One of our 6 Holocaust survivors from the Toledo area was a hidden child in Rotterdam during the war. He comes to the United States with his mother. They both survive, and he comes in the 1950s. He becomes a college student in the 1960s. And he sees the civil rights issues that are happening in the United States. He becomes one of these students from UCLA that joined the Freedom Riders movement. And because what he saw happening in the United States paralleled his sense of, his experience of being disenfranchised and his sense of being an ethnic minority within a culture that left no place for it. So there's room for us to use those kinds of cross-cultural kinds of connections to begin to understand. It's not easy to put those things together and compare people's traumas and compare people's pains, but there is possibility there for using those things to stretch across, to stretch outside of our own, what I call culture zones or comfort zones. There's a sort of a leading educational theorist, who suggests, one of the problems that students face when they only read texts about people like themselves, students in the dominant cultures, that get an inflated sense of who they are in the world, and they don't come to understand other people's cultures. So Gloria Ladson-Billings talks about cultural competence, and one of the components of cultural competence is that we as educators teach our students to know their own culture and to know at least one other culture, which is a pretty low bar. But I often wonder whether we're doing Gloria Ladson-Billings' culturally responsive pedagogy as well as she wants us to, which is just to get outside of our own culture zone and learn about somebody else's culture.
David, I can read your mind. You want to speak?
Well, I'm going to try to answer your question from a different perspective, and this is my opinion. There are no similarities to what is happening in the Middle East with the Holocaust. The only similarity is that since the 1920s, it has been the explicit plan of the surrounding nations not to have the Jews living in the Middle East. 1 million Jews had to flee the Arab world. And the only reason another Holocaust didn't occur in the Middle East is because Israel existed and was able to be a welcoming place for those 1 million Jews. Every Jew in Iraq, every Jew in Yemen, every Jew in Libya, every Jew in Tunisia, every Jew, almost every Jew in Morocco, Syria, Lebanon, had to flee. If it wasn't for the state of Israel, there would have been another Holocaust in the Middle East. That's where the similarity ends. And the stated goal of every leader in the Arab world, explicit and specific, was to destroy Israel and the Jewish people in the Middle East. That's where the similarity ends. And my belief is that Israel, as a country, whether you like it or not, it exists. It currently exists. We don't have a time machine. Whatever you believe should or shouldn't have happened in the past, it's a country that exists and it's going to defend itself. Every other country in the world would defend itself from attempted annihilation. And that's how I feel about it.
Rabbi, any thoughts? Any thoughts? You want to take us in that direction or another direction?
Well, I was thinking before that I think Holocaust education is deeply important, but I think a broader topic is education around anti-Semitism and around hate, and it has to be relevant in this moment. And so, what I would share, not getting into the specifics of the Middle East, because sorry. What I would say is that this moment is unique, and so we need to be relevant to where we are now. We need to deal with the situation as it is today, and there can be a danger in trying to draw too many lines between the Holocaust or World War II and where we are today. I don't think that we want the progression to be, if we were to draw ourselves back and say, well, today is just like 1933, then we would be having a world war in the next 10 years, and I think we don't want to draw that line too clearly. I think it's important that our kids are having their own experience now, and I think there are opportunities that we didn't have 75, 80 years ago.
We're at an inflection point right now.
Correct.
This very moment. I've got a question from somebody out in the audience who says, TikTok and other social networks can use social media to educate those who don't know Jewish media. Am I reading this correct? I think I'm. How can we use? You heard the question. How can we respond to social media negativity? What do you think?
So this is something that I've been talking about a lot in the last 12 months. The challenge here is that there are only so many Jewish voices in the world, and there are only so many Jewish voices on TikTok or Instagram or whatever the next social media tool is going to be. And it's not a platform that we really have a winning opportunity on. We could put all of our efforts into campaigns on those social media platforms. My guess in working with young people is that it would fall mostly on the eyes and ears of our own community, and not get spread out enough for the rest of the community outside of the Jewish community to hear that and see that and learn from it. Certainly there have been some really great campaigns with commercials airing during the Super Bowl that's reaching a wider audience. I can't speak to what the statistics are of the impact of those, but I think we need to be thinking completely outside of the box about how we educate about the Jewish experience, how we educate about anti-Semitism, and in my opinion, how anti-Zionism or anti-Israel rhetoric is just veiled anti-Semitism, and it's giving an opportunity for those voices to be louder than they would have been prior to October 7th.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, take that.
Ooh, as I told my students, I do not tick the talk, nor do I snap the chat. But One of the things we do at ADL is we have this amazing Center for Technology and Society. And what they are looking at is actually the impacts of social media and who is following the guidelines that have been set out. We still say social media is kind of like the Wild West. You would think that there would be more guidelines around social media, but there aren't. And so I think that's one of the things that we can do is really push for more firm guidelines around social media and report problematic posts. Unfortunately, the algorithms are set up to keep you in an echo chamber. So I think like what Rachel said is that if we are working really hard to get Jewish voices out there, it's going to get to the people who want to hear about Jewish voices and Jewish ideas, because that's how our algorithms work. And so I think we're going to be better off fighting the fight against the hate that is allowed to be spread on social media and really working to enforce those kinds of guidelines.
Can Hollywood or can Broadway do anything? I'm thinking of Hamilton, which I've seen 3 times. Hamilton, talking about American history and using a predominantly black cast, I suppose, with hip hop or whatever kind of music that is. I'm not certain of it, what they called it now. But can that help? Well, is that a piece of it?
I mean, I think so. I think we see a lot of really amazing Jewish artists in film and in theater. I used to teach film studies. Something very interesting about the film community is that Jews were not allowed to participate in the theater community, and part of why they moved to California was to create a space for themselves where they could have an artistic community. Thus, Hollywood was born out of being displaced from places like New York. And I think there are a lot of great voices out there that are amplifying the Jewish experience. And so I think people are really trying. I'm not sure if other people have perspectives on, artists or, can Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, maybe do something for us. I'm not sure.
I might just dive in here and say, in education, one of the things that we've done a lot more work on in the last 10 or 20 years, the term was information literacy, right? Which is kind of teaching kids to be more critical consumers of media, whether that's mainstream media or social media. That term is actually swiftly switched from talking about just information literacy, teaching these kids to be more critical consumers, and it's a term called digital citizenship, which is teaching kids to be more thoughtful and responsible creators of media as well. Kids are not just consuming TikTok, kids are creating it. So one of the things that I saw in my college students was, and you talked a little bit about that echo chamber. I asked them about recent events in the news and where they got their news, and most of them don't get it from any kind of mainstream news organization. They get it from their TikTok feed and their Insta feed. And they'll say, I'm getting this direct, these are content creators, right there where it's happening. And I say, okay, that's really powerful. You may be getting some elements that don't show up on the evening news or don't show up on on MSNBC or Fox News. And that's really powerful, but you need to ask questions of the media that you receive, and you need to ask who's creating this content, where is it from, is this really happening, is this true? Just like we would need to if we're watching any kind of media. But also what we're really thinking about now is how to teach them to be responsible when they start creating their own content and echoing that, reverberating that material or passing it on to the folks in their feeds in a kind of a way that's not thoughtful or critical or responsible. So.
Did you want to add something to that, David?
I would say that we need to use all the tools that we have available to us in combating anti-Semitism, and I think social media is clearly a very powerful tool that we need to use. I think that it also means that we have to use our other avenues, like speaking at city council, being outspoken, speaking to your friends and family. It means writing editorials. It means using all of your tools that are available, including social media. I think, part of the propaganda that's being spread, some of it which dates back to Soviet Union style stuff, is trying to break relationships that we have, whether they be family or friends. And you may have seen that happen to yourself. And I think that sometimes that's inevitable when you have different viewpoints, but I think you should also make an effort to connect with the people you love and try not to let the propaganda sever those relationships. And I think I see different concentric circles, and I think the most important thing to start with is your close friends and family. And I think there's been a lack of some education, especially actually within the Jewish community, even in teaching the children about the history. And so I've posted videos on my Instagram about Jewish history, and I've had parents send me messages that they shared it with their children. So I think everything helps a little bit. And even though we're maybe not winning the social media fight, it doesn't mean we stop trying.
Martin is giving me the signal that we're rounding third and heading home. And so he's going to ask me, I'm going to ask you for final thoughts. But before we get to that, let me tell you that I was looking at a movie the other day on television. I'm a fan of old television movies, South Pacific. And there's a song in there, which I will not sing, but I will give you the lyrics of 2 stanzas. It's called You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. The singer talking about hate. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8. To hate all the people your relatives hate, you've got to be carefully taught. Hate is taught. It's learned from people who teach us and talk to us. Final thoughts.
I would say it's important to recognize that in society today, we find ourselves very siloed. And I think people find that they can only fight for one part of their identity. What is the part of my identity that is hurting the most right now? And so we see people who are Jewish focused really on Jewish issues, or people who are in the African American community who are very focused on all the things that are facing the African American community, or people with disabilities, right? We find ourselves very siloed, but our identities are not siloed. We show up with a lot of different parts of ourselves, and we should not have to choose which parts are allowed to show up with us. And so I think it's important that we continue to recognize that the more we can stand together in recognition of all parts of our identities, the stronger and louder our voices can be in fighting hate. Because people who hate, they are, like I said, equal opportunity haters. We can be louder and stronger if we stand together, and I think that is the most important thing I hope people can take away with them this evening, is that we are all in this together, and you don't have to be Jewish to be impacted by anti-Semitism. And so I think that the more we can be allies, the better off we'll ultimately be.
Mm-hmm. Down at the other end of the table, let's go to Tim Mernon of Bowling Green State University.
Yeah, I guess I want to echo that a little bit. I think one of the most powerful things we can teach folks to do is to get outside of our own worldview and to step in somebody else's shoes and to understand that experience and that perspective. Anti-Semitism is not a Jewish issue. Anti-Semitism is everyone's issue. We need to understand, one of the questions I sort of explore with my students is, can I be anti-Semitic and not know it? Is anti-Semitism this deliberate hate of Jews, or am I implicit in anti-Semitism by my lack of awareness of how it functions in the world? I see these signs in people's yards for the last few years that have said, end racism, and I think it's a great sentiment, but I think, first of all, maybe we need to understand racism. We need to understand anti-Semitism. We need to understand how these things function and how we might be implicit in some of these kinds of experiences. So I could go deeper on my soapbox, but we're rounding third and heading home. And
We're
we have
rounding
more
third and
intelligent people on this panel, so,
And-
but it's just, I'll leave it at that.
Rachel, let's go to you.
Yeah. You know, as I've shared, I work with the college population, and those of us who are past college age, whether or not we've went to college or university or not, know that that's a really important formative time in young people's lives. They don't show up at 18 years old knowing everything that they know about themselves, like who they are, and then they step onto campus and they're being bombarded with all of this information, like what do you support, who do you stand for, who are you voting for, what does it mean to be Jewish, all of these things, and they don't have a clue how to answer that or how to engage in that. And so my final thought is something that I've shared a lot also in the last 12 months, is that we have to start having conversations at home. We have to start having conversation in our high schools, in our middle schools, in our elementary schools, in our places of worship. We need to prepare our young people for what life is like outside of the nest of their home, so that they can figure out who they want to be and how they want to do that with all of the information, so that when they get on the TikTok universe and they're being bombarded with what I would define as a whole bunch of propaganda about what's happening right now in the Middle East, but there's certainly a bunch of propaganda all over the place on those platforms, or unfounded or unsubstantiated data pieces, that they can say, that's not what I was taught to, or like, I want to use my critical thinking skills to like dive deeper and like find some other sources so I can see if this is credible or not. But right now, our young people, whether they're Jewish or not, black or white, American or international, they are coming of age at a time where it's okay to just follow what's happening and not do any of their thinking for themselves or research for themselves.
David Moritz, you are looking very thoughtful, and I know you've got something to say.
I'm trying to think about the way to answer this question. I'm trying to focus on the anti-Semitism concept here, and say that the Holocaust education is incredibly important, and what you're doing here is amazing. And the work that's being done here in Akron is just fabulous. To teach the Holocaust is incredibly important. And the question I've been asked before is what we're seeing today similar to what was happening in Germany in the 30s. And I would say one reason to understand the Holocaust is to be able to recognize those things. And there are certain things that are similar. I think we're having issues. It's one thing to have groups of people who might be anti-Semitic, who might be doing certain things. The real problem I'm seeing now is the enabling of certain people or things that have power. The enabling. When I was at UC and I watched what was happening, it's one thing to have free speech, but if you take over a campus and make it unsafe for other people, that's no longer free speech. And what I saw on the campus was a complete enabling by the university, if not encouraging. And the same thing with the media, completely not reporting anything that would put a negative light on that. And so those things, having enabling some politicians, even in Asheville, when I was attacked in the library for doing nothing, you can watch the video, we were just sitting there watching, just like you, and one of the main politicians there had an interview with the media and said something to the, basically victim blaming, saying something to the extent that, well, why, you shouldn't go to a place that there might something happen. Okay, wait, now we're saying that we have to let people take over. There's a bit of a trend there of enabling of anti-Semitism. I see that as, in fact, more dangerous than the anti-Semitism itself. And that's where I see the similarities with 1930s Germany. But as a country, I think we're very far away from that history. We're a much more stable country than Germany was at that time. We have more robust government and separation of powers. We have a long 250-year history of democracy and as a republic. So I think, but I think doing this and more events like this is incredibly important so that people can see the signs of anything, whether it's to Jewish people or any other people in America. I think that's the conclusion, that's the the takeaway I wanted to give.
In other words, we can get to where we want to go. You
Yes.
see us as moving in the right direction and positive in 10 seconds.
You asking me?
Yeah.
I'm an activist because I have concerns about anti-Semitism, but at the same time, I have faith in the United States and its institutions, and I think there are some questions I have with the enabling and the encouraging that I see from people in authority, especially at the university levels. You've seen it, Congress, when people have made their statements and so forth. I've attended some of those. But overall, I see that the United States has systems in place to be able to deal with it, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to stop fighting to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Rabbi Joshua Brown, bring us home.
I recently read a quote that says something to the effect of, people love being critics, that we are drawn to criticizing others. People love to have cheerleaders. We love to have people telling us what we want to hear. But ultimately what we need are coaches, people who will listen and guide us. I'm not an educator in the way that some people on this panel are, but I studied education, and what I remember most was the definition of education. You can't achieve education until you reflect upon what's happened. And so Hamilton is not education, or TikTok is not education until, I worry about defining those as education. Until someone sits down with you and unpacks it, and somebody helps put it in context, what we need are people who are capable of doing that really well in a world where you can turn on the TV and our leaders are often working really hard to be critics or cheerleaders. And they're not doing a good job of helping to coach us to understand the context. So what we need are really skilled people who have relationships with our students, who can sit down and unpack these things like anti-Semitism, like a war in the Middle East, like anti-Zionism, like world history, to unpack it not in TikTok, but in a conversation that's going to take a lot longer than however many letters or seconds you get in TikTok. So I think we have to do that hard work, and looking at our phones isn't going to do it.
Friends, your panel. Now here's Martin Belsky. He's back. He will take us home.
Let's thank Leon, please, for his leadership in questioning. Our comments will be relatively short, but 1950s, my father made a reservation at a hotel in Atlantic City, Chalfont Haddon Hall. I can mention the name now because it no longer exists. Sorry? Oh, okay. In the 1950s, my father made a reservation for a hotel in Atlantic City called Chalfont Haddon Hall. When we showed up, all of a sudden, there was no rooms for us. My father looked very ethnic. I'll use that phrase. So do I. And my father said, you have no right under New Jersey law to deprive me of my room because you don't like who I am. The manager called 2 police officers to take my father and me and my brother and my mother out of that hotel. Okay, my father being the quiet, shy person he was, just like myself, he decided he was not going to stand for that, and he stayed. And after that, the hotel no longer discriminated. In the 1970s, I was working in Washington, D.C. on the House Judiciary Committee, and the House Judiciary Committee was considering funding for the Holocaust Museum. Unbelievable large number of hate mail came in, opposing the idea of helping the Jews, as distinct from the rest of the world, have their own museum, even though most of the money was going to come from private donations. And to his great ability, Peter Rodino, who was a non-Jewish chair, just said, throw him away, tear him up, get rid of him. In the 1990s, shows you how things change, I was being interviewed for a job as the president of a small liberal arts college called Cornell College in Iowa. The faculty, the students, and the alumni recommended me to get it. I got a call from the chairman of the Board of Trustees, and I actually couldn't believe what he said. He said, a lot of the members of the board have some problems with your high-powered ethnic style. We're going to do a new search. As recently as 3 weeks ago, in the gym at the JCC, of all places, a person came up to me and pointed his finger at me, just like this. And he said, "It's your fault, Amy Acton." You know, I think the woman who was, I wrote her name down because I want to remember it, Rochelle Welkowitz, and she said, "In Anthony Fauci, it's your fault that we have all these problems with the vaccines. It's your fault. It's your fault." And I said, "Who's the you? You know who the you are." And I said, "Who's the you?" And he said, "The goddamn Jews." This was in the JCC. I couldn't believe it. That's not a scenario like that. Wearing my legal scholar hat for a second, in a Supreme Court decision called Sherry Tefila, Supreme Court of the United States, in interpreting the Civil Rights Act of 1964, said because they are treated as a race and not just a religion, Jews are a race for the purposes of the Civil Rights Act. Many people who oppose Jewish people who are anti-Semitic are also, as you heard, people who are haters. It's not just Jews that they hate the other. One of the things we can do in remembering the Holocaust is the Holocaust was not just killing of Jews, although 6 million of them were killed. It was killing of gypsies. It was killing of people with mental disabilities. It was considering of the other. And if you remember what Hitler did in watching TV about the Olympics in this scenario. So the idea of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, to me, is a much broader issue than the issue of just hate against Jews. You've heard our panelists, you've heard our speaker. I hope you'll take that message with us and with you. So let me, if I can call up, if I can, now Elaine Flippen to come up and talk about our program here in the spring, and then some final comments, and I'll let you go.
Thank you so much, Marty. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm leaning in, Esther. First of all, I have to say that I'm extremely humbled to be here. What I've just heard was extraordinary, and I'm not sure that I have a lot of things to offer, but I am, of course, the transition to an important part of this evening, which is involving teachers and students. So can I see the hands of any middle school and high school teachers in the room? Okay, a few. All right. As a teacher of English, I have the responsibility and joy of selecting literature for my students. I want them to read great books that are eloquently and beautifully written, but the books also need to resonate with young people. And I hope that the books I choose for my students offer important life lessons. This is a tall order. Elie Wiesel's memoir, Night, meets all of these requirements. And now more than ever, the lessons of history revealed in his story crackle with relevance and urgency. Young people need to understand the dangers of prejudice, bigotry, and injustice. They also need to know that paths to justice exist, and that even during the Holocaust, courageous and righteous acts saved lives. The Akron-Summit Council on Genocide and Holocaust Education offers an outstanding program for students that allows for rich, rigorous study of the Holocaust. The annual contest proposes a topic about which students may write or create art pieces. My students move beyond Wiesel's story and into this period of history as they examine other personal narratives, documents, visuals, and artifacts. The Council offers an array of research resources that accurately reflect the Holocaust. Additionally, human resources, Laura, a shout out to you, are ready to answer questions, suggest speakers, and visit my classroom. The contest is an authentic project-based learning experience that engages my students in research about the Holocaust. So for the educators out there, we know what project-based learning means, And this is something that is the real deal. They choose the direction, type of writing or art, and resources that suit their purpose. The time invested is robust, and I do mean robust, yet very worthwhile. Students learn to think and evaluate critically. They must meet deadlines and criteria for publication and presentation. They strive to meet standards of excellence employed by committed, professional judges. We hope that educators joining us this evening will explore the website of the Akron-Summit Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education to learn more about this year's contest. The rules and the guidelines are published, along with this year's topic, Lessons of the Holocaust, Countering Discrimination, Apathy, and Denial. Curated resources are also available on the website. One doesn't need to look further to actually engage in this activity. This is a contest unlike any other. What other opportunity allows young people to discover the power of their voices to speak for those who can no longer tell their stories? Last week, the literary world lost 2 survivors of the Holocaust who spent their lives telling their stories, each in unique, profound ways. On October 9, writer and social media star Lily Ebert died at the age of 100. Through her memoir, Lily's Promise, and I'm not a TikTok person either, but she made incredibly popular TikTok videos, Ms. Ebert made her life's mission to speak for those who did not survive. She said, I would talk for my own sake, and I would also speak for those I loved who hadn't survived, and for all the millions of people I never knew who died with them all over Europe. I want the world to never forget this terrible crime against humanity. On October 7, we said goodbye to author Laura Siegel, age 96. She and her mother survived and were reunited in England, and then they made their home in the US. An interviewer asked Ms. Siegel if she and her mother ever talked about the Holocaust and the family members who died in the camps. She replied, no, not really. What would we have said? We both knew. And the interviewer paused and then asked, knew what? And Laura replied that it was unspeakable. That it was unspeakable. That has haunted me. Children and teenagers often feel powerless and hopeless and voiceless in our troubled world. When given a chance to speak for those who were more powerless and more hopeless, we embolden them. Entrusting our students with the precious stories of those who survived the Holocaust or perished, we nurture empathy. Empathy that may outlast all of the facts that they've ever learned. And most importantly, this educational journey reminds young people that in order to prevent atrocities, we must remember the past and make conscious choices and decisions every day to create a more just and peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go on the website to find the date and program. The program in the spring is the awards to best writings and also best art, plus also a speaker. We sort of have that scenario situation. You heard mention of the council. I want to have the people who are on the council please stand up so we can all recognize you and thank you. If you're on the council, come on, I know you're here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you all for the work you do. A couple of pieces of procedure. One, if you drove here, I'll make sure you go to the library downstairs, the security office, to get your what's it? Our QR situation. Also go on our website, and if you have the brochure or the flyer, make sure you sort of, on the seminar flyer, enter and give some complete feedback. Finally, let's again thank Leon, Barb, and our panel for the work that they've done. I thank you all for coming, and I thank you all for helping us learn the lessons of the Holocaust. Have a good night.